Welcome to ASHG 2020. Please listen to this brief review of technical tips and guidelines for ASHG sessions. If you have questions for speakers, please use the question and answers tab, not the chat tab. Moderators will use these and answer as many questions as possible during the Q&A. ASHG encourages attendees from all career stages to ask questions. Respect your colleagues' work, and remember, ASHG's policies prohibit video capture, screen recording, screenshots, audio recording, or taking pictures of speakers and their slides. Use the chat tab to interact with fellow attendees to just say hello or share your excitement about the content. Stay connected and share your thoughts through our social media channels using hashtag ASHG20. Respect speakers' preference if they opt out and ask you not to share or discuss. Speakers will note this at the beginning of their presentation. Check out the Handouts tab to download additional resources if provided by presenters. Thanks for your attention and enjoy this.
Hello, I'm Tony Wynshaw-Boris, this year's president of the American Society of Human Genetics. Welcome to the ASHG 2020 virtual annual meeting. Like many before me, I can truly say that serving as president this year has been a great honor and privilege, and thank you for electing me. I have also had the privilege of working with a terrific board of directors, my colleagues on the executive committee, and a dedicated ASHG staff led by Mona Miller and Pauline Minhanet. I want to give a special thanks to Amanda Olson for providing several slides for this presentation. I have been an ASHG member for more than 30 years. My first meeting was in 1989 in Baltimore. When I arrived, I didn't know very many people, but I felt that I was almost instantly brought into this community of human geneticists that was ASHG, a diverse group of American and international scientists, physicians, genetic counselors, educators, scholars, and more. Everyone from trainees, graduate students, and fellows through senior leaders. I felt that I was in a welcoming big tent, expanding my sphere of interactions, friends and colleagues. ASHG has been my scientific and organizational home since that first meeting. I cannot overestimate the impact that ASHG has had on me and my career. No matter where I was located, and I have been fortunate to be at many different institutions, I was always part of the ASHG community. 2020 has been a challenging year for ASHG and for our world. COVID-19 has completely upended our professional and personal lives. Worldwide, there have been more than 7 million deaths and 30 million infections, while in the US, there have been more than 200,000 deaths and 1 million infections. We have sheltering at home, social distancing, remote work, homeschooling, virtual patient visits, unemployment, financial strains, etc. Many of us know those who have died from SARS-CoV-2, family, friends, coworkers, colleagues, and/or patients. We also know those who have recovered and others who are now so-called long haulers. So it's been impossible to have an in-person meeting. Besides COVID-19, there have been other challenges this year. The tragic killings of Black Americans have focused our attention on the seemingly intractable problems of racism, health disparities, and economic inequalities. The growth of misinformation and mistrust of expert scientific opinion and polarization of the world have made it very difficult to address these challenges. So I'd like to pose two questions during this address today, during these challenging times. What can ASHG do to engage and marshal the strength and breadth of the human genetics genomics community for the benefit of human genetics genomics research? And how do we move forward in an ever-changing world presenting new, unforeseen challenges? I propose that ASHG can provide a big tent. So how did I come to the big tent as a metaphor for this address? In reading the addresses of ASHG presidents since I've been an ASHG member, I found particular resonance in the years when we were facing external challenges, much like this year. The post-9/11 meeting in San Diego with Hunt Willard as president, the post-Hurricane Katrina meeting in New Orleans in 2006 with Steve Warren as president, and the San Diego meeting in 2007 that took place during the wildfires that nearly canceled the meeting with Wiley Burke as president. Having attended those meetings, I remembered each of those talks and was struck by the themes they had chosen. Hunt and Wiley each alluded to the tent and the umbrella that ASHG provides for our community, while Steve had stressed the role of the citizen scientist in advocacy. Thus, I decided to use the theme of Big Tent that ASHG provides for our community for both this address and for the presidential symposium. So Big Tent is defined in the Merriam-Webster's dictionary as a wildly inclusive composition or character that allows people of differing backgrounds, opinions, and interests to be members of a group or organization. It often refers to an inclusive political party appropriate for this year in the United States. But I believe it's also appropriate for the great diversity of the genetics genomics community and our membership at many levels. First of all, the Big Tent of ASHG accommodates the entire genetics genomics community: researchers, genetic and metabolic physicians caring for patients, genetic counselors, educators and scholars, industry, and advocacy organizations. For the genomics community throughout the world, ASHG also provides a Big Tent. 1/3 of our members are from countries outside of the US, and we have members in every continent, perhaps except for Antarctica. We're also a Big Tent for members of other genetics organizations and societies that we have as partners, including the European Society of Human Genetics, National Society of Genetic Counselors, and the American College of Medical Genetics, among others. Now, there are several tangible manifestations of the Big Tent that ASHG provides. First, there are journals. The American Journal of Human Genetics is one of the premier scientific journals for human genetics and genomics research. Under the leadership of Bruce Korf, the journal continues to set the standard. This year, the Society introduced a new fully open access journal, Human Genetics and Genomic Advances. Under the leadership of Mike Bamshad, HGG Advances provides another avenue for publication of human genetics genomics research for ASHG members and all of the community, and increases the diversity of options for publication of our research. The annual meeting also provides a Big Tent for ASHG members. Again, the pandemic has prevented us from having an in-person meeting, so we're having our first annual ASHG virtual meeting. The program committee with Chair Terry Manolio has produced a really exciting virtual meeting. The ASHG staff took an all-hands-on-deck attitude to make sure we would have an outstanding meeting as well. And it's certainly unfortunate that we won't be able to see each other in person, but in spite of this, this is guaranteed to be the best ever ASHG virtual annual meeting. And I want to thank the program committee for their efforts as well. The diversity of research has always been one of the defining characteristics of the genetics genomics community. Today, the breadth and depth of this research continues to expand, spanning wide areas of biomedical research from basic to translational to clinical. One way in which this is reflected is in the funding by the National Institutes of Health in the US. For example, from the beginning of the Human Genome Project, as shown in the 1990-2003 years, the National Human Genome Research Institute used to fund virtually all of genetics and genomics research. Now, the NHGRI funds only about 10% of human genetics genomics research at the NIH, while 90% comes from other NIH institutes and centers. And this is in spite of the fact that the NIH research budget has increased 5-fold over this time, while the NIHGRI budget has increased 10-fold. These two percentages were reversed a mere 15 years ago. So because of this remarkable funding diversity, and we noticed that among our board members and members, the ASHG board hosted 13 leaders from 9 NIH institutes and centers in the spring. Eric Green, the NHGRI director, helped to organize the meeting. We discussed a lot of shared goals and interests, including career path guidance to encourage a large and diverse genetics and genomics workforce, how ASHG could provide visibility to existing institute training and career development programs, and what were the barriers to diversity in research populations and potential recruitment, and future engagement between the board and our NIH leaders is assured. The ASHG Big Tent also includes industry. There's a growing number of genetics and genomics researchers in biotech and pharmaceutical companies that bring novel therapies to patients. And we're also, of course, involved in advocacy. ASHG, as the largest membership organization of researchers, is well positioned to be a powerful voice for the genetics genomics research community before lawmakers. To highlight this diversity in research and advocacy, I have selected a number of leaders for the Presidential Symposium, which will be held on Thursday, October 29th from 5:30 to 7 p.m. The title of the symposium is The Big Tent of Genetics and Genomics, Research, Translation, and Advocacy. Eric Green and I will moderate the panel discussion of these leaders, who are Diana Bianchi, the Director of NICHD, Gary Gibbons, the Director of NHLBI, Mary Woolley, the President and CEO of Research America, and George Yankopoulos, President and CEO of Regeneron. These leaders illustrate the diversity of human genetics and genomics research and advocacy, and will discuss a range of topics critical to the field. I look forward to seeing you there. So let's return to the two questions that I posed earlier. What can ASHG do to engage and marshal the strength and breadth of the human genetics and genomics community? And how do we move forward in an ever-changing world, presenting new and unforeseen challenges? We can be guided by a recently unveiled strategic plan that is implemented by our reorganized ASHG committees. The strategic plan was unveiled at our meeting last year in 2019, and it consists of our mission, core values, a vision statement, our envisioned future for what we would like to see 10 years from now, and specific goals and objectives that we would like to accomplish in the next 3 to 5 years. The strategic plan is available on the ASHG website for your further examination. The strategic plan was put together during the presidencies of David Nelson and Les Biesecker and unveiled during Les's presidency last year. I want to point out some key features of the strategic plan. First and foremost is the vision. People everywhere realize the benefits of human genetics and genomics research. Now that's a Big Tent vision if ever there was one. We also have 4 immediate goals and objectives for the next 3 to 5 years. Year-round programming, member engagement, diversity, and public awareness. Now, certainly all 4 of these goals and objectives are very important for our membership, but they're also outward-facing to our community and to the society in general. To institute the strategic plan, the ASHG committee structure was revamped last year as well. The board of directors and executive committees still sit at the top of the organizational chart, but on the same line, we have the Diversity and Inclusion Task Force and the Nominating Committee. These are on the same line because both of these committees are important for all the committees of ASHG. The Diversity and Inclusion Task Force, as its name implies, covers all of diversity and inclusion and equity issues for the society. And a member of that task force is embedded in each of the committees listed below to make sure that those committee activities put diversity, inclusion, and equity issues at front and center. So similarly, the nominating committee had an expanded charge last year. Rather than in the past where the nominating committee proposed the slate for the board of directors and presidents, the nominating committee now accepts nominations for all of the committees listed below. And so in doing so, ensures not just diversity, but also a good representation of society membership in each of those committees. The committee's structure was revamped by a committee headed by Gail Jarvik, this year's president-elect and next year's president. There are a number of committee activities that went through 2020. The committees all met last year at the 2019 annual meeting, and then in person at the ASHG offices. They developed action plans. Again, these action plans are on the ASHG website, and those provide the priorities of these committees for the next few years. Each of the action plans has strategic objectives, desired outcomes, guiding principles, and action plans. The board moved forward on many of the action plan activities of these committees, and were able to do so because the financial resources that were available to the board. The society is in a strong financial position, thankfully. The plans were then implemented by ASHG staff. So in spite of the challenges this year, the board, staff, and committees did remarkable work for 2020 in advancing the agendas of ASHG. So I would like to respond to the questions I posed above and like to use as examples advocacy and diversity of all the different committees I could possibly discuss today. So advocacy is under the purview of the Government and Public Advocacy Committee, or GPAC. The GPAC is chaired by Lynn Jordy, a former president of our society, and staff member Derek Scholes, Senior Director of Policy and Advocacy. GPAC set forth a set of guiding principles for citizen scientists, has a 10-step way for ASHG members to get involved in advocacy, formed a GPAC action plan, and instituted a number of statements and perspectives. And I want to point out 3 of them. 2 of the perspectives, advancing diverse participation in research and advocating for genetics and genomics research to policymakers, both were published in the American Journal of Human Genetics. A 3rd statement was strengthening diversity in STEM, and this was a letter to House leaders supporting House Resolution 2528. So that leads me to diversity and inclusion. And again, I already mentioned that the Diversity and Inclusion Task Force spearheads all the diversity, inclusion, and equity activities of the society. The DITF is chaired by Dana Crawford, who is also a member of our board, and staff member Kanika Pulliam, the Director of Career Programs and Workforce Diversity. As I noted, a member of DITF is on each of the committees of ASHG to ensure that diversity and inclusion are part of all of the committee's activities. In addition, I should point out that the Nominating Committee and Awards Committee has a charge to make sure that all nominations for committee membership, as well as for our society awards, take into consideration the broad diversity of our community in all aspects. And they've done a very good job in that, especially in the last year. The DITF has released an ASHG Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion Policy Statement. We celebrate genetic diversity, ensure our leadership and broader membership reflects and appreciates the diverse communities, promote diversity and inclusion in our scientific events and forums, create a more diverse and inclusive genetics and genomics research workforce, advocate for greater population diversity and inclusion in research, engage diverse audiences more consistently and competently, and support the benefit of research among diverse populations. The DITF has also been engaged in a number of other activities. First of all, they've already formulated an action plan, but unlike other committees, their action plan activities were integrated with each of the ASHG committees, given their presence in each of the ASHG committees. We developed a special pricing plan for meeting and dues for developing countries to make it easier for our colleagues overseas to become members and to join us in our meetings. A Human Genetics Scholars Initiative program, or HGSI, was started in 2019. HGSI supports and engages early career scientists from underrepresented backgrounds in partnership with the NHGRI, Biogen, GSK, and Roche. The first class, I was able to meet with each of them during this year, and they're a tremendously talented group of what our future leaders are going to become. The second class was selected this year. The DITF also spearheaded a number of statements and perspectives. And again, I'm going to point out 3 of those activities. The first, an ASHG survey that was done in partnership with Research America and released earlier this year in January found that Americans strongly support human genetics research and potential. And you can find the survey information on our website. We also had two statements. First was ASHG shares anguish and anger over tragic deaths, which we sent out as a press release in the summer, and a statement regarding concepts of good genes and human genetics, which was a press release in September of this year. Because of all of these activities, Mona has decided to appoint Chaseman Jackson as Senior Director of Diversity, Equity, Inclusion to help oversee all of these and other activities that the Society is undertaking now and in the future. You'll be hearing more from Dr. Jackson in the near future, but we welcome her to the Society. The killings of George Floyd, Breonna Taylor, Ahmaud Arbery, and countless other people this summer resulted in protests and anger. And ASHG responded to these tragic events, first by releasing the statement that I just mentioned, ASHG shares anguish and anger over the tragic deaths, in June. But we felt that we needed to do more than simply release the statement. And so we thought it was important to hear from our members and the genetics genomics community in general. So a DEI dialogue series was organized this fall by Kanika Pulliam. It was a series of 4 interactive web-based dialogues on diversity in ASHG, 2 on the workforce, and last on research. So to respond to the questions I posed, I discussed how we could use ASHG as a big tent, implementing the strategic plan through our ASHG committees, and use the examples of advocacy and diversity. So what about the future? Well, we have had challenges in 2020, but there's one thing for certain. There'll be challenges tomorrow, the day after that, and the day after that. One of the challenges I noted earlier was polarization. Now, we may seem particularly divided now, but I would posit that we've been divided for quite some time. The polarization is amplified by social media, but it's likely the impact of radio, television, and mass media advertising had similar profound effects in the past. The ASHG as a big tent has to be able to bridge one pole to the other during these polarized times. So science have always been supported in a bipartisan fashion, so our advocacy outreach must also be bipartisan. After all, as Mona reminds me often, Democrats and Republicans are susceptible to genetic disorders at similar frequency since we're all from the same species. As 2 personal examples, I was born and live in Ohio, which is a supermajority Republican state, but I lived 15 years in California, which is, of course, a supermajority Democrat state. And in spite of this polarity, we must reach across the aisles in these states for important issues. Now, on the other hand, we must take a stand when needed, particularly when it relates to human genetics and genomics. Therefore, we released an ASHG statement last month regarding concepts of good genes and human genetics. In it, we reiterated our strong opposition to efforts that warp genetics knowledge for social or political ends. And ASHG affirms the biological reality that we are one people, one species, and one humanity. So how are we doing? So I wish we had more broad information. I'm going to focus on women and diversity. I wish we had broader information, but that information is not available at present. So I'm going to give examples from my own department, medical school, and university. So in my own department, we have 31 primary faculty in the basic sciences and 7 MD clinical faculty. Of the basic science faculty, 14 are female, 17 are males, and they're scattered across all of the academic ranks. In the clinical faculty, 4 males, I didn't miscount it, 4 females and 3 males, and they're also span across the spectrum. With respect to our basic science chairs, we have 14 departments and 1 female chair, and of our 21 clinical departments, 3 female chairs. Our university president and school of medicine dean, ironically, are both female. So although we have quite good representation among faculty in males and females, as we go up in the leadership chain, that diversity is much less. And certainly we have challenges today for especially our young faculty with childcare responsibilities, extra responsibilities for COVID-19 and school disruptions, which often fall on our female faculty members. And these are additional tenure challenges. What about diversity? Well, of the members of my department, I have, at least to my knowledge, 1 Hispanic American, 0 Blacks, 0 persons of color in my clinical faculty, and in the basic science and clinical chairs, there are no persons of color. So the same sort of challenges apply to persons, to our diverse populations as they do for women. Childcare responsibilities, especially for women, COVID-19, school disruptions, and it's even more acute for persons of color. In addition, the number of faculty who are of persons of color pay the diversity tax. That is, with limited faculty members, our diverse faculty members are asked to sit on several committees to expand diversity. While that's a noble goal, certainly it impacts the timeline for what our faculty members can use for their academic pursuits. And we have to take care of that. What about the pipeline? In my own department, we have 40 PhD students, 22 female and 18 male. 23 of those are white, 18 Asian, 2 Black, and 1 Hispanics. We have 16 genetic counseling students, 14 females and 2 males with 0 persons of color. So we must develop the pipeline. The ASHG HGSI Scholars Program is certainly a good start, but we have to promote that and other programs that help us with the pipeline. Now, I mentioned before that we have a difficulty with actually having data on workplace diversity, and that data is difficult to get because it's not often collected, and there's voluntary reporting. To try to address this problem, NHGRI awarded a contract to ASHG to gather accurate workforce diversity data in genetics and genomics. So we're partnering with the American College of Medical Genetics, National Society of Genetic Counselors, and others in the community, including Black in Genetics, historically Black colleges and universities, the Minority Genetics Professional Network, and other groups. So in academia at large, using my department as an example, progress has been made in the pipeline, and some progress has been made for women in faculty recruitment. That progress has not yet reached far into the leadership levels. Progress in broader areas of diversity has not been as significant. But since we're now at the ASHG meeting, how are we doing in ASHG? So I believe we're having some successes, and we should acknowledge that. I believe we can be proud of what ASHG has been able to accomplish with diversity in the board of directors, as shown here, committee membership and leadership, and awards. Included in our board of directors are a trainee director, Zach Nevin, and an early career director, Neil Hanchard. So the board at our fall meeting will also discuss where we stand today and chart plans to move forward in the future. So stay tuned for more information later. In spite of our successes, though, we must also acknowledge that progress has been slow. It may take overall time for society to fully incorporate these ideals, but we can do what we can to make progress in our society, ASHG, and help progress in the broader society as well. So to conclude my address, I'd like to provide an example. Justice Ruth Bader Ginsburg has placed a focus on her remarkable life. In the New York Times in 2016, Justice Ginsburg published an article, Advice for Living, where she reflected on the long road that resulted in more equal opportunities for women. To quote from Justice Ginsburg, "In the year 1956, when I entered law school, women accounted for less than 3% of the legal profession in the United States, and only 1 woman had ever served on a federal appellate court. Today, about half the nation's law students and more than 1/3 of our federal judges are women, including 3 of the justices seated on the United States Supreme Court bench. Women hold more than 30% of law school deanships in the United States and serve as general counsel of 24% of Fortune 500 companies. In my long life, I have seen great changes. So yes, there have been great changes, but it takes a frustratingly long time to make headway. And so we have to have a commitment to make headway in the areas of diversity and advocacy. We must take action as a community, take action individually. We need to make progress, and we have to assess that progress. Only by a sustained commitment to progress over the short and long term will we make the progress that we desire. As Martin Luther King Jr. said, the arc of the moral universe is long, but it bends toward justice. So let's help to bend the arc so that people everywhere realize the benefits of human genetics and genomics research. So I thank you and enjoy the meeting this year.